Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Gran Turismo. Let's talk about it. So Gran Turismo is directed by Neil Blomkamp, who also directed the likes of Chappie and District 9. And this is, of course, a film adaptation of the famous game, which I believe is a PS4 exclusive. Anywho, this is a part of Sony's PS4 cinematic universe, okay? So we first of all had Uncharted from, I believe, last year? Was it last year? It feels like decades ago. But Uncharted came out and now we have Gran Turismo. And if you are surprised to see me reviewing this film, then I don't blame you, because it was kind of under the radar for me. I of course went to the cinema many times this year, and so I definitely saw the trailers that played before most of the films that I saw, and it feels like they've had trailers out for months and months and months. But other than those trailers, I haven't really seen a lot kind of be said about this film. But I decided to check it out because even with those trailers, I was kind of intrigued. And I have to say, you guys aren't going to believe me, is the thing. I have to say, Gran Turismo is actually excellent. It's actually brilliant, guys. I know. Before you pause the video, before you check to see if this is an authentic Jeans Movie Chats video, before you somehow exit the whole window, please don't do that now. Please don't do that, okay? Please don't clear your browser history thinking that this is a scam. I'm telling you, Gran Turismo is actually an excellent film. I know only 2% of you are going to believe me, but trust me, it is. And let me at least say my case. Let me at least say my case to you so that you guys can be convinced, because when I watched this film, when I tell you that I was completely converted, okay? When I tell you I was invested from start to finish, I ain't lying. So at least give me a chance to plead my case, and then you guys can decide for yourselves if you check it out in the cinema. But up front, I'll tell you right now, I do recommend you seeing this film, and I'll tell you why. But first of all, before we dive into my thoughts on Gran Turismo, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado, guys, let's get into my thoughts on this movie. So Gran Turismo is a little bit different to Uncharted because it's not just a video game adaptation. I mean, first of all, Gran Turismo itself is not just a video game, it is a racing simulator. So it's supposed to give you a real life sort of representation or simulation of what it is to be in a race car. And so you have all of these accessories that you can buy, and it's supposed to be fully immersive and, you know, really authentic. And so you have a bunch of these gamers who are like huge fans of the game, and they've really become experts in racing, even though they've never raced in real life. So then in comes Orlando Bloom's character, Danny Moore, and he is a marketing expert, and he heads over to Nissan in Tokyo, and he comes up with this idea to start a huge marketing campaign where you'll have a bunch of these gamers actually be put to the test and actually become race car drivers representing the Nissan team. And we're brought through this whole journey through the perspective of Jan Mardenborough, who was the real life gamer that became a race car driver. So he was a huge fan of the game. He was one of the best players in the world, and we see at the beginning of the film that they have this like in-game competition to see who will get the best times in the laps with the simulator. Okay, listen, I'm trying my best, okay? But at the beginning of the film, we see the major competition that they have to determine who the best players of GT are in the entire world. And then these players are invited to join the GT Academy, where they'll be training to become actual race car drivers. And so they have to go through a lot of physical hardship, okay? They have to really change how they think about the game in order to apply it to real life, because they're genuinely like racing on actual race tracks, okay? It's all based on a true story. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we have all of these like hurdles and competitions and trials that each of the players have to go through until they're narrowed down to a top 5, and ultimately only one of them can actually partake in the Grand Prix. And so you have David Harbour's character Jack Salter, who is there as the lead mechanic but also their coach in order to ensure that they're ready to partake in this competition, and he's the one calling the shots. You know, he's the one trying to see who the best out of this group is. And of course, naturally, everyone's very skeptical because there are a bunch of these teenage gamers. Like, what do they possibly know about racing on an actual track? But it turns out they might know some bits and bobs through their experience playing Gran Turismo, because it's not just a game, remember, it's a simulator, and it turns out it's a pretty accurate one at that. And as I said, the main character of this story that is based on real life, again, we'll talk about it in a second, is Jan Mardenborough, who is this, you know, young kid from Wales of all places. And you know, he and his father have disagreements about his passion for Gran Turismo, because his father believes that he should be pursuing something a bit more realistic. You know, he should have a plan in place. He's dropped out of uni. It seems like his life isn't really lifing the way that it needs to. And so his dad is just trying to push him to get, you know, real goals and aspirations, because his dad himself used to be a football player when he was younger, but then things didn't work out, and so he doesn't want that to be repeated for his son. And Jan does have a brother who is a football player, who seems to have a stronger bond with their father because they bond over football, and he feels like the odd one out in the family because of his passion for Gran Turismo instead, and, you know, wanting to become a race car driver. But once this competition comes into play, you know, he wants to seize this opportunity to actually make something of his passion, and so he is clawing his way to the top, and ultimately, well, I think you can guess that our Jan ends up being the winner of the competition. He ends up on top of all of the other top players in the world, and he ends up becoming a race car driver, actually competing on the track. So now that I've gone through the story itself, it is time to talk about my thoughts. It's time to talk about my feelings on this. Guys, when I tell you I was living for this film, I was actually on the edge of my seat. The film is excellent. The film is good. I don't know what to tell you. And it breaks my heart because I saw on Rotten Tomatoes that it has some crazy number. It has like a 58% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm telling you, I'm looking you dead in the eye. I'm telling you, it does not deserve that score. That score is so biased. A lot of these reviewers have clearly dismissed this film, either because of the, you know, horrible marketing, to be fair, also because it's a Sony film based off of a, you know, video game simulator thing. And also because, you know, on the face of it, it seems like a throwaway racer movie like Need for Speed or something like that. Like, it just does not seem like the kind of film that would have depth to it and that would have, you know, a brilliant execution. I think in the hands of any other director, that would be the case. I think in the hands of a less talented director, we would have a bog standard, run-of-the-mill racetrack, you know, drama that is very forgettable and doesn't have any lasting power. But here in this case, I genuinely think that Neil Blomkamp made all the difference to deliver this, you know, really compelling story that had invigorating racing sequences. I was genuinely on the edge of my seat during the racing sequences, and not to mention, they didn't skimp out on the racing sequences either. We didn't just get, you know, blips and blobs of several races and then have a one grand race at the very end. Like, they were really giving us the goods. Like, we got several races on those tracks. I remember thinking, like, when is this film gonna end? Because not because I wasn't having a good time, but because I kept seeing all of these like race sequences, and I was like, when are they gonna run out of budget? Like, surely they can't afford to do all of these. But they really did. They really committed to recreating racing sequences over and over again, and you could see that, you know, whatever the budget was, and this is a mid-budget movie, which we'll talk about in a second, so support it for that reason, if nothing else, right? But this wasn't the most expensive movie of the year by any means, but you could tell that all the money was on the screen because they absolutely committed to showing us the experience of what it was like to be a racer on that track. And it's because of these racing sequences that I truly think that the best way to experience this film is in the cinema. I know you think I'm crazy. I know you're like, Jean, you think if I'm going to even spend my time watching Gran Turismo that I'm going to leave my house and watch this in the cinema? Sis, you're asking for too much. I know, but I'm telling you, just do it for me. Okay, give this film a chance. Watch it in the cinema. Sit in the best place possible. Okay, get your popcorn out. I'm telling you, it's such a fun ride. It's so good. You won't regret it, I promise. But still, if you can't make it to the cinema, at least check it out on, VOD or streaming, wherever it lands eventually. I think this is going to be huge on Netflix. Because it's a Sony film, they don't have their own streaming service, so they have a deal with Netflix where they'll release their films through Netflix after, like, I don't know, 6 months, a year or something. But whenever it hits Netflix, I think it's going to be a gargantuan hit. But it does kill me. That it's probably not going to be a huge success at the box office, because I genuinely think, considering the quality of the filmmaking here, it absolutely deserves more. And also, sticking to the subject of the intense racing sequences, I did also want to point out that it is revealed at the end of the film that Jan did his own stunts in the movie itself. That revelation brought such a huge smile to my face, because it is just wonderful to see, especially as we've experienced, this version of his story. We'll talk about it. But as we've seen, where he started and his hopes and desires and dreams to become a professional race car driver is so brilliantly conveyed through this story. To hear at the very end that he was actually his own stuntman, like he was actually doing the stunts in the car because he did become an actual race car driver in the end in real life, was just such a beautiful way to kind of round this story out. And by the way, I think this was also very well written, because it was a great angle to tackle this video game adaptation. Usually when we have video games adaptations, we tend to focus on characters within the game itself, whereas in the case of Gran Turismo, we have this really cool story of a real life person who was able to use this game and use the knowledge and passion that he developed from playing it, and turn it into a whole different lifestyle choice, like a whole different career path and vocation that he was able to pursue. So it's a really inspiring story, and like I said, it's a whole different angle to tackle a video game adaptation. And lastly, before we dive into the characters and the actors, I did also want to mention that Gran Turismo has officially joined the elite club of movies that are centered on topics that I don't usually care about, but completely converted me anyways. Yes, this extremely elite group of films include the likes of Whiplash and also Ford versus Ferrari. I remember once upon a time I reviewed a little film called Ford versus Ferrari, and I mentioned in that review that that film completely captivated me, even though I'm not usually into, race car driving or Le Mans or any of that. Okay, but I was invested throughout Ford versus Ferrari. I was at the edge of my seat. Okay, and so it's films like that, like Whiplash, as I said, like Top Gun Maverick even, that are able to kind of bypass my personal interests or biases and just get me invested in the story from start to finish. And I'm glad to say that Gran Turismo has been added to that elite group. I wouldn't say that it's on the level. Okay, let's just bring it down a little bit. I'm not going to tell you it's on the level of Ford versus Ferrari or of Top Gun Maverick or Whiplash or of another film that I finally checked out this week after being inspired by Gran Turismo, Rush, that was directed by Ron Howard. Yes, I finally watched Rush. I've been wanting to watch Rush forever, but after watching Gran Turismo, I was finally like, okay, let's do this, okay? And Rush was brilliant. It was absolutely phenomenal. I know most of you are going to be like, yeah, Jean, we know. But listen, it took me 10 years, but I finally checked it out, okay? But yeah, I wouldn't say that Gran Turismo is quite on the level of those other films, but it's damn good, man. I promise you, look at the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm telling you, it's a damn good movie. Okay, so next, I did want to give a shout out to the actors, because I think they did a phenomenal job in this film. In particular, the actor who portrays Jan Mardenborough, Mr. Archie Madekwe, he was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. That kid can act. He was doing the actoring. Okay, he was doing the actoring. Like, he really sold me on the character. Oh my goodness. And the character goes through all these ups and downs, left, right, centers, but he is able to deliver on all of those different emotions, and on top of everything else, he's able to convince you of this character's conviction and determination and passion for what he is doing. So I really enjoyed Archie's performance in this film. Like, you could tell he was given one shot and he was like, listen, palm sweaty, bum spaghetti, we're gonna make this work. And then next, I would say David Harbour as Jack Salter was also brilliant. I mean, in this film, Jan basically has two kind of father figures, and one of them is Jack and the other one is his actual father, portrayed by Digimon Hansu. And I would say that, you know, David Harbour, he was with him a lot of the time because he was on the track and he was obviously the lead mechanic and, you know, running this whole program, and he was just brilliant in this role. Of course, at the beginning you have that like antagonism there because he doesn't believe in any of these kids. Like, he sees them as these like lazy gamers who, you know, stay up all night playing the game, but they don't actually know anything about racing in real life, and they kind of don't. He puts them through hell, okay, through these trials and tribulations, and it shows that many of them just had no clue, but Jan was able to make it out of the academy successfully. And so you see how Jack kind of warms up to Jan and starts to believe in him, seeing his success and the natural instincts that he has in the track is just really, you know, inspiring for him, and it really opens his eyes to the potential of this kid. And so seeing that kind of father-son bond develop throughout the film is just like so heartwarming. And then you also have Orlando Bloom. I haven't seen Orlando Bloom in anything in ages, but he's also in this as well, and he was also really good in this movie. And it's really interesting because his character isn't like 100% good, but he's definitely not a villain. He's, you know, a marketing expert. He's in charge of marketing. This was his idea in order to better market Nissan. And so he wanted Nissan to be this, you know, car brand that stood for basically Gen Zers who are passionate gamers being able to become race car drivers in real life, you know, professionally. And so that would eventually lead to Nissan's, you know, whole brand identity being changed and elevated, being far more exciting than it currently was. I don't know how well they managed to achieve that in the long term, but anywho, that was the dream for Orlando Bloom's Danny. And so you see Danny pitching this idea at the beginning, and then he has to spearhead the whole thing because he's the liaison between the kids and David Harbour and Nissan, you know, the company itself, you know, the corporate entity. And so he's trying to make both things work, and sometimes he makes decisions or threatens to make decisions that are, you know, questionable, a little bit too corporate minded for my liking, but then most of the time, you know, he's on board with the team and he just wants to see, you know, all of them, and especially Jan, succeed. Alongside the main three characters, we also got some great performances by Digimon Hansu, who portrays Jan's father, and again, they have a complicated relationship at the beginning there because, you know, he wants Jan to pursue something that is a little bit more stable and a bit more of a surefire route to success. He just wants him to have a plan, and my guy doesn't have a plan at the beginning, okay? But in the end, his father is able to see the true talent that he has and the passion and skill that he has on the track, and he, you know, respects him for it. He's finally able to see his son for who he really is versus who he wanted him to be. And we also got the appearance of none other than Paxton. Paxton from Never Have I Ever. Yes, yes, Darren Barnett is also in this movie as the sort of rival to Jan. And I think he was pretty good. He wasn't in it a lot, but it was a very similar sort of story arc to the one that we saw in Top Gun Maverick, for instance. Or we also saw a similar dynamic in Rush, although nowhere near to the same extent. But I feel like Gran Turismo definitely felt like there needed to be some kind of rivalry, some kind of tension somewhere. And so that's what we see, especially during the academy stage when they're all competing for this all-important role. And the last thing I wanted to talk about before we dive into a couple of my critiques is the music. I liked the music in this film quite a bit. I think the soundtrack was really strong, as was the score, which I believe was co-composed by Lorne Balfe, who does the score for the Mission Impossible movies. So guys, we have some very talented people on board here. Oh, please see this film. But as great as this movie is, there are a couple of critiques. First of all, I do think that I was more impressed with this film before I watched Rush. I definitely think, you know, after I watched this movie, I was far more impressed. I was like, oh my God, this is cinema. This is amazing. And then I watched Rush and I was like, oh, I can see how Rush has influenced this. I can see the parallels here, you know, and so that definitely tempered my mood just a little bit. But I do still think it was a very strong film on its own, and it's about a totally different thing. So I don't think it's a, you know, word for word copy of Rush by any means, but I was able to pick out a few of the influences that I think Rush had on this movie. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other racing movies that I've never watched that probably influenced this film as well. Now, another critique that I saw being thrown around about this movie is the fact that even though it's supposed to be based on a true story, it's not in the least bit accurate. I'm sorry to say, apparently it's not accurate at all. To be honest, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care in the slightest. So I haven't even looked up what the actual facts were and how they compared to the events of the film. Like, I haven't done any of that research. I'm so sorry if you wanted me to, but like, I just don't care because it was so good. And I also like the fact that I didn't know anything going in because it kept me on the edge of my seat. So I don't want to know. I don't want to know what really happened. And also Jan was, you know, actually a gamer who turned into a professional race car driver. So like, that's all I need to know. Like, that's the most important element of this story. That's already, you know, beyond belief. So the rest they can fudge up if they want to, but I wouldn't knock points or too many points off of this film because of that. Although the critics seem to want to. The critics are more than happy to knock down 5, 10, 15 points for this movie just on that basis, because that seems to be the reoccurring critique that I see in some of these reviews. And I'm like, seriously? You're gonna give it a Rotten Tomato because it's not 100% accurate? But no! Don't piss me off. And my final critique would be that there is some CG used in this movie, you know, as to be expected. And for the most part, I think it's decent, but there are moments where it's a little bit iffy. Now, I commend Neil Blomkamp for trying to find, you know, a way to show how Jan visualizes the track, you know, when he's on it, how he makes these key decisions, and just tying all of his decision making on the track to the skills and the, you know, knowledge that he developed playing the game or the simulation. And so he does this by creating these kind of CGI visualizations that I think for the most part work, but sometimes the CG looks a little bit, oh, it looks like some PS3 graphics, okay? I don't mind too much. I mean, first of all, this movie didn't cost $300 million like some of these other films from this year, and the CG was so much better than some of the stuff that we got from these other films that cost 10 times more. The budget for this movie, by the way, was 100 million, and you could tell that they put all of that 100 million on the damn screen because, like I said, they did not skimp out on action sequences and they were all very well executed. So yeah, sometimes the CG was a little bit rocky, but I forgave them for the fact that they did such a good job in other aspects of this movie that it was still a really enjoyable experience, and the dodgy CG on occasion action didn't take you out of the movie like it did with, oh, I don't know, The Flash maybe. So yeah, guys, after seeing trailers for Gran Turismo ahead of pretty much every single film that I watched this year and wondering what this movie was about, I finally got to check it out and I was pleasantly surprised because it was genuinely good, and I highly recommend you check it out as well. I'm so sad to see that it's probably going to do very, very poorly at the box office. That breaks my heart, and I feel like this is a huge theme in 2023. Like 2023 has been full of these genuinely excellent films that have been such huge disappointments at the box office. Like these great films that literally no one has watched. And it started with Dungeons and Dragons. Let's talk about that. Okay. And then we bled into Mission Impossible 7, right? And then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The fact that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did not open with 300 million when it clearly deserved it breaks my heart every day. Yes, it does. And now we have Gran Turismo to add to the list, and it's so heartbreaking because it's one thing to have a film that's crap not do well, but when you actually see that it's good, when you actually see the quality, and again, sometimes it's from unexpected IP. Like, who would have thought Dungeons and Dragons would make a great film? Who would have thought Gran Turismo would as well? But like, guys, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is on the screen. But in the meantime, guys, I'm going to be giving Gran Turismo an 8 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Gran Turismo, hopefully you believe me. Hopefully you believe me. It's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie, or if you're going to check it out down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.